Alright, we have these really cool Winsor Newton watercolor sets. Now this is our mixing tray, this is our paintbrush, and it's so small it looks like I'm a little super spy here, and when I open it up, the package, it came like this. And so it's nice that you can leave the actual paintbrush in the tray here. And then I've got my little watercolor pans in 12 different colors. Now I've already taken off the wrappers, but before I did that, it showed the label and the name of each paint. So I'm taking this small piece of watercolor paper, and then what I've done is numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 12, and then I put the paint name. And this kind of helps me and guides me to remember what the paints are called and then what the colors look like once they're on watercolor paper. And so I'm actually going to take a paintbrush that's a little bigger for this and clean water, and I'm just going to dab some water on each color to wetten up this dry paint so that before I start, so I can get a nice pigment on my paintbrush. When I started making this video, my power went out, so some of these are already wet, so I'm just going to go through and add water to the ones I haven't yet. And I like to let this sit for just a second so it can really saturate the dry paint. I love watercolor because what I'm given here seems like a small amount of paint, but it lasts me forever. When you start painting, you want to grab water, and then you're going to make a little puddle into the mixing palette, and then you're grabbing water from the actual pan and mixing it onto the palette before you start painting. I do see the mistake when people start painting with watercolor that they'll just dip their paintbrush right into the pan and paint from there. Sometimes you don't have enough watercolor, sometimes you have way too much and the saturation of the paint is too harsh where it becomes opaque instead of translucent like you want with the watercolor. So always paint using your palette. And then what you're doing here is just familiarizing yourself with how much water you use on your actual brush. If you have too much, it puddles like the one I just did with the ochre. Sometimes what you can do is tap your paintbrush off with a paper towel if you have too much water loaded, like I did just now with the burnt umber, and then lift some of that water back up off of the paper. Now the Chinese white paint isn't going to show up. That's usually, I rarely use white, but just for mixing and adding a tint to your color. But really your watercolor paper is white, and so when you want more of a tint, you're just going to add more water to the actual paint, and that's how you get it to become lighter. Now the next step you're doing here is you're adding colors together. So I just did 1 + 1 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. You can create whatever you want, but I want you to familiarize with yourself with these 12 colors and see how many different colors you can make. I wish I had done this on a bigger piece of paper because the colors that you get from this small tray is endless. Now you'll notice you don't have a black paint, but 5 and 10, which would be your burnt sienna, and then your ultramarine, give you a nice gray. Now also if I did burnt sienna, or I'm sorry, burnt umber with any of the blues, I can create a nice black. I just need to saturate the color heavier. Instead of a gray, I could get those nice dark colors. Okay, cleanup is easy. What I like to do is just take the water that I have for my paint, and I just make a big dab in the tray. And ideally it's good to switch out your water before so it's clean. But then I just take a paper towel and I clean out that tray. And I'll repeat this 2 or 3 times until it's all the way finished being clean, because you don't want to start painting the next time and you have residual color left that you don't realize, especially if you have pale yellow color and then you add a little bit blue. It really will green up that tray, and that's frustrating, not to say the least. The other thing I don't worry about is my paints. They're wet, and so I usually just leave the lid off and let them dry. Now if you can't do that and you're going to close this and put it in your backpack and you worry about it dripping, I will lay a piece of paper towel down and shut the lid, and then that prevents that. The next thing I want to do is be careful about my paintbrushes. Anytime you leave your paintbrushes in a cup for a long period of time, meaning like an hour or 2, it can misshapen the tip of the bristle. They're like hair, they're sensitive. So if you sleep on your head at night, you're going to get bedhead in the morning. If you leave your bristles like that, they're going to have bedhead, and you can never get those tips the same. So I rinse it really nice. Notice how I'm dabbing it on the paper towel in the direction of the bristle, and I'm not scrubbing it. And then I make sure and run my fingers through at the tip, and that they're the same shape when I got them.